I want to start by asking you something that I've always thought about. Because in the
Yeah.
Christian theological tradition, they talk about,
Yeah.
like, quote, agape love. Okay? And I
Yeah.
know this is a
Yeah.
technical term. You'll probably know about this more than I do. But the whole idea was that, like, God's love for us is truly unconditional. And
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
a sense in which that's like the purest, highest kind of love. This love for you, no matter what you do, you cannot
Mhm.
abrogate or remove this love. But I want to ask you: is the highest kind of love, at least if we abstract from this specifically theological setting, the
Yeah.
love that humans are capable of? Is the highest kind of love really unconditional, or is there actually something problematic about loving someone, anyone, with no conditions at all? And like, what does that mean? So let's start
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a super interesting question and one I'm really interested in. I think a really nice place to start when answering that is to say, well, are we talking about romantic love?
Mm.
Are we talking about parental love? What kind of love are we talking about? Historically, we might have spoken about eros and agape. Some people are still very interested in those categories, but kind of in common language, what we're interested in is like these kinds of love. Platonic love, romantic love,
Mm.
parental love. So, um, I think certainly unconditional love is going to be sort of more is going to be more plausibly something that we want in the parental case or familial case,
Mm.
um, than it's going to be in a platonic or in a romantic case. So that's a kind of nice place to start. Um, and then I guess the question is like, what I mean, when you think of unconditional love, what are you thinking of? Are you
Well,
thinking? What do you
I'm
think that means?
thinking. I think you're right about parental love, and that you can't treat all these conditions and kinds of love equally in this case. And so I guess we could go through each kind, like romantic love. Should romantic love be unconditional? Because that gets into
Mm,
some nuanced questions about when you should stop loving somebody or not. I mean, I take
mm,
it that, like, most of us think there are circumstances like abuse where the right response is to remove yourself. And maybe you say, well, that's compatible still with loving them, even though you end the relationship. But I don't know. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
I definitely have opinions, yeah. I mean, I think often we have this desire in romantic love to be loved unconditionally. I quite like the sort of the meme about would you still love me if I were a worm? Are you familiar with that?
I am, but illustrate that for us. Talk about that.
Yeah, so there's this meme. It was like a girl posted something like, "Me kept awake at night wondering if my partner, my husband, would still love me if I was a worm," and crying, thinking he wouldn't. And I think this is like obviously it's very silly, but I think it does get at something quite interesting, which
Mm.
is that we have this desire often to be loved, completely unconditionally, no matter how we treat our partners, perhaps, or how we change with time. We want that security that
Yes.
someone will love us forever, but it's not always legitimate, right? And in the case of love for an abuser, I guess rather than asking like should you stop loving somebody, it's also interesting to think about should if I'm abusing you, say we're together, and if I'm abusing you, it looks like it would be unfair of me to ask of you that you still love me
Mm.
under those conditions, right? And it would be kind of legitimate if you didn't love me anymore. So when I think about it from that perspective, yeah, I think it looks like we've got a good case to say that perhaps you should take steps if you can't, turn your feelings on and off. You should take steps to embrace or resist love, given the circumstances, given the way you're being treated.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think many people share that intuition and that desire for this unconditional love, to be loved always, no matter what you do, that security that comes with it. But I wonder, is that incompatible? Like, that kind of love, is that incompatible with loving somebody for particular reasons? Like loving them because of the way that they are? I mean,
Yeah.
it's almost like there are certain things you don't want to be loved for or have the love be dependent upon, like, a certain hairstyle, a freedom from wrinkles, things that are going to
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
But maybe you do want to be loved for, like, what you take to be certain unalterable, or more firm aspects of your personality. Things that you take to be like essential features of who you are. Your sense of humor, your own reliability in being a part of the relationship, and so on and so forth. Like, it seems like those are more appropriate as the justification for love. And then I would say, okay, no, I can be loved for that. So anyway, back to the main question: is unconditional love
Yeah.
incompatible with like loving someone for particular reasons?
Yeah, I mean, lots of people have argued that it is. That is that unconditional love is incompatible with loving for reasons, especially for reasons that arise from the beloved's qualities. So those might be things like you mentioned. The qualities could be things like, beautiful wrinkleless skin. Not that wrinkly skin can't be beautiful, but or it might be, their intelligence, their curiosity. It could be anything really. But I think the most plausible version of a kind of qualities rationalist view, we might call it, so that's a view that love involves appreciating someone for reasons, and the reasons arise from that person's qualities. Kind of the most plausible versions of those views are going to take the qualities to be like these fine-grained things, probably, and they're going to be probably relational, the way he makes me feel, the way she, I don't know, understands me without a word, these kinds of qualities. And yeah, going to your question, is that incompatible? It has been thought that it is, but I think perhaps it's not incompatible on the kind of most legitimate and plausible version of like an unconditional love ideal, which is going to be, we don't really want to be loved unconditionally in a strong sense, like if I became a worm or if I became an abuser, to give a more kind of realistic case.
Yes.
We don't want our partners to still love us under those conditions.
Yes.
What we want when we talk about wanting unconditional love is like we want to be loved even if we have a terrible accident, or even if we go through a really rough patch and we're not our sparkly funny selves.
Yes.
And I think a qualities rationalist view that says we love for reasons is compatible with that. Qualities rationalists can say, well, if you have a deep enough appreciation of enough of somebody's qualities, then periods where they're not at their best, they're still going to be exhibiting a bunch of those qualities that you appreciate. If they have a terrible accident, they're still going to be exhibiting a bunch of qualities. And the continuation of enough of the qualities, plus a kind of commitment, a loving commitment that's maybe, a separate issue to whether you think love is grounded in reason, is going to encourage you to look for more reasons to love them. Or you might find that you come to appreciate somebody's resilience that wasn't something you noticed about them before, if they're going through a rough patch or something. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the common refrain, like, I want you to love me for me. And I think that's right.
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
you're not necessarily saying I want to be loved unconditionally in this very strong sense. You're saying I want to be loved for those characteristics or aspects of me that I take to be like core defining features. So not my hair, not for my sense of style, perhaps, not for these things that come and go and change. My ability every day to be happy, that's going to change, but that's not me. But I still think like I want to be loved for certain aspects of me. So I'll give you an illustration of like where this intuition comes from. I was in a philosophy workshop a couple years back where someone presented a paper on their take, their philosophy of love, but in the context of this like theological discussion of like, what does God love about us, about persons? And this guy was arguing that, the best kind of love and the love God exhibits, and I think it goes along the lines of unconditional love, is that God loves like the bare thisness of each person. So strip away, like, and this is some obscure philosophical language, but it's basically like strip away all of the qualitative properties and facts about me and just get to my core thisness, my bare identity, in a radical sense, to the point where like you could like, this view would commit you to saying that like I have no essential features. I could have been an ice cube. Like this bare thisness could have been an ice cube. And that's how radical this is. But let's say that there are these bare thisnesses that define our identity, each of us. Well, what he's saying is God loves that thisness, and just for the sake of that thisness. And I said, I don't want that kind of love. I think that is a abstract, bizarre, removed kind of love, an austere kind of love, where it's like, I want someone to love me for me more than just my bare thisness. Maybe not every feature of who I am right now, because some of those are contingent, but like, I want some content to that. I do want to be loved, I guess, for my sense of humor. I do want to be loved for the unique things about me that I contribute. And for a shared history I have with somebody, that seems plausible. But I mean, are there philosophers who really disagree with that? And they say, no, no, no. The best kind of love, or love, I guess, in its true nature, it doesn't involve reference to those kind of reasons.
For sure, there are. I mean, it's interesting that you said without any reference at all to reasons, because there is a really interesting account by Vellman where he argues that well, he kind of wants to make a couple of things that look like they're not compatible. So he argues that that love involves kind of an appreciation of bare personhood. So that sounds like it's something quite close to the sort of
Yes.
thisness. He spells it out in kind of Kantian terms. Our bare personhood is our rational nature, which I think, yeah, we can for now use as a sort of proxy for the thisness. That's stripped of all your personal qualities, and it's just something everyone has in equal proportion. Every person, that is, has an equal proportion, and it makes everybody equally love worthy and equally lovable. But he does make reference, so he's not quite as extreme as what you're suggesting, because he does think that our observable properties. So I think he says like the way someone sips his tea or tips his hat or something like that, or the style of his gait. They're like quite kind of quaint examples. Are basically the observable properties are ways to get at somebody's bare personhood and the value of their bare personhood. And that's why he says, because in philosophy of love, we're often concerned with like, why do I love this guy and not this woman, or this woman and not this guy, whatever it might be. So he says like that's why we love one person and not the other, because even though everyone is equally love worthy, everyone has this valuable bare personhood, this thisness, only some people's properties reveal the value of their thisness to us. And then, yeah, if people who would deny that observable properties play any role at all, they do exist in abundance, in fact. But I think a problem, at least from my perspective, that comes up with that view, that's quite an interesting one, is you get the question of, well, it seems like you can then hate somebody. You could hate somebody's observable properties and still kind of love their thisness. And lots of people have bitten that bullet, and they don't even necessarily see it as a bullet to bite. But at least for me, that really doesn't chime with my experiences of love. Not romantic, not platonic, not familial. So
No,
yeah.
I mean, I would think that the only person who's really capable of that kind of love would be God. That like people, or less kind of people, humans,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
not the way that we love. And so I guess most of my interest is focused specifically on like friendship and romantic love. Those are
Yeah.
most clearly the kinds of love that we really do like choose, that we didn't have to experience, but we seek them out and then we choose it. And maybe not, maybe think like we just find ourselves loving people, and that's an interesting question. But we still chose the circumstances, where with like family, there seems to be a sense in which, at least initially, we're obligated to love them. So when it comes to like friendship and family, like every single person I think that I've really loved in those ways, I mean friendship and romantic, it's as a response to like getting to know them, and like as I get to know them more, I grow to love them more. And so like that to me supplies good evidence that I'm, at least as a human, operating under this idea that like psychologically, like I grow in my love towards somebody as I get to know who they are, what they do more and more. It's a response to those kind of things. And I have to think that that's correct. Like morally speaking, that's okay. That's a good thing. And so I guess then my question that I had was something you said, that obviously like everybody, we want to say everybody is worthy of love. Maybe with some exceptions for people who've done such horrific things that they no longer warrant that. And yet I can't love everybody equally. Like there's only so much energy in my life, and I can't have like an invested friendship, for example, with everyone, not to speak of like a romantic connection. So what are the conditions, according to some views anyway, under which we can say like, on the one hand, yes, everyone is worthy of love, but on the other hand, it's okay for you to only love specific people, a very narrow selection of people? Like how do we make sense of those two claims?
Yeah, I mean, it's a super interesting puzzle. There is a bit of concern in the philosophy of love about partiality, and actually Vellman, who I mentioned before, he's concerned to address this problem where it seems like a sort of Kantian ethics, at least, is going to, and probably, lots of different moral systems are going to demand of us like a certain kind of impartiality, and that's what's going to be moral. We're not showing partial treatment to one person rather than another. We're respecting everyone, we're treating everyone fairly. Whereas love is like going to make us distinctly partial to one person or
Yes.
a handful of people. So yeah, this looks like a puzzle, and he's trying to solve it. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would start by replying that I think there are, especially in the romantic case, there are ways we can get around kind of commitment to everyone is worthy of love that don't seem morally outrageous. And it's primarily by saying that people's love worthiness in the romantic sense is relational, and so you're only ever worthy of one particular person's love, and then we can say, well, if you treat someone terribly, you aren't worthy of their romantic love, and it doesn't mean you're not love worthy. It just means that you're not worthy of their love, and that's a so we could say that and that doesn't mean that we only love the people who are worthy of our love or anything like that. But yeah, I suppose that's one way of saying we don't have a kind of duty to love everyone because some people treat us badly. And then in terms of just like the reality of there's probably lots of people who are worthy of our love or would be worthy of our love who we nevertheless don't have the time to love or capacity to love. I think then that just follows that there's probably a bit of accident involved in who we kind of brush up against in the right way, and who is in the right circumstances to have properties that are compatible with our properties, experiences that make them attractive to us and make us attractive to them. That would be my way of cashing that out. Is that a satisfactory response?
Yeah.
Would that solve your problem?
Yeah. So it seems to me like what you're saying is that at baseline, barring again like truly horrific individuals, everybody is worthy of love, but that doesn't mean that everyone is worthy of a specific individual's love. So that, but see, it's interesting because like to be worthy of love, it really depends on your broader ethical framework, normative ethical framework. Where if you're Kantian, for example, like you say, it's like if everyone has the same inherent amount of value, and I mean we want to agree that they do, like on what basis do we treat some people relative to us as more important than others? And like we have to. It's psychologically impossible not
Yeah,
to do that.
yeah,
Like if you want to have real friendships and real romantic love, you've got to invest certain people with at least more subjective importance. And I guess I'm just wondering like on what basis can we say that that is like a good thing to do, that that's morally permissible, even though everyone objectively has the same amount of value? It's kind of like, well, then maybe love itself detaches from just strict facts about value. Maybe, I mean, that seems right. If everybody at in some level, we're equally valuable objectively, so then love can't be reducible just to like a response to the objective value in another person. So maybe that's an obvious point.
I mean, yeah, I think like the idea of objective value when we talk about people and persons is going to be kind of fraught, right?
Right.
Like,
Okay.
it's going to be quite difficult to spell out exactly what that would mean because you can have a kind of you can be equally valuable as a person, that can't the bare personhood. But that wouldn't mean that like you and I get on as well as I
Yes.
might get on with like someone else. And that would mean that there'd be a sense in which like the person I really get on well with has a bit more value for me than you, which is not to say that you're therefore like less worthy of love or less valuable as a person. So yeah, I suppose I would query that notion. I think a relational account is going to be, like I said, the way we kind of get around that, and the idea that you know the more over time you invest in getting to know someone, as you said, finding more things to appreciate about them, sharing in experiences, especially what we might call like transformative experiences, where you learn and grow together, you're going to become like increasingly compatible with them in the good
Yes.
case over time. And that's going to make your relationship to each other more valuable to each of you than your relationship to someone you don't have those experiences with. Yeah, which is actually kind of an answer that qualities rationalists, so people who think that love is grounded in reasons arising from the beloved's qualities. It's a response that proponents of that view are going to give to like a trading up kind of a worry,
Hmm.
which is going to say something like, if love is this rational response to beloved's qualities, then say you've got your beloved, call them B, and they have like five qualities, and you value all of those qualities at like a particular level, and
Yes.
then B plus comes along, and B plus has those same five qualities, but like each one a little bit better. Or even just one of them a little bit better. Like they're going to say the qualities rationalist has to say you're equally justified or more justified in loving this other person as well, or maybe
Mm.
even it's no longer rational for you to love this original person. And yeah, the response is like, well, that wouldn't happen because the way you kind of come to love and value someone is over time and together. And
Yes.
if someone just pops along, they're not going to, well, first, you're not going to know what all their qualities are. And second, they're not going to be attuned to you, you know, in the way that your current partner or friend
Yeah,
is.
I mean, shared history has to feature into the
Yeah.
reasons that you love someone, and you can't
Mm-hmm.
just duplicate that with somebody you haven't ever experienced. You can't tack that on as a quality to somebody else. You have to actually go through life together to get that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So, okay, the a parallel question then that we've kind of touched on is love ever justified? Like, does it make sense to say that love of this specific person is justified, but love of that specific person is unjustified? And if we say that, yeah, it makes sense to talk about that. Is it intrinsic to the concept of love to be justified or unjustified, such that it's actually like incoherent to talk about, well, I love somebody, I really do, but it's unjustified? Or can we say, no, 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 you can, but it is just an extra thing, it's unjustified? It's kind of an obscure question, but so let's start with the first one.
No.
Can love be justified or unjustified?
Well, I think yeah. If it can, it's going to be an outlier in moral psychology. So that's like the study of the ethics of affect, emotion,
Mm,
anger, for example, fear. We talk about anger and fear as being justified and
mm,
unjustified. Why not love? Would be my question. Um, if we're answering like love can't be justified or unjustified because if it's a case of love, then it's a case of a justified attachment to someone or a justified concern, affect, however you want to cash it out. Yeah, I mean, we could say that, and I think I've definitely like been sympathetic to that view in the past. I suppose one reason, a very pragmatic reason for thinking that like love is justified, and if it's not justified, then it's not love. It's some other love adjacent thing, like maybe infatuation or dependency, which we're quite happy to say those kinds of mental states can be irrational, or at least not rational, irrational. Um, is the benefit of that way of setting things up is it kind of allows us to preserve love as this thing that's like kind of always rational and therefore we might think always valuable and to that extent. And philosophers who are interested in giving accounts of love are really interested in, at the very least, not contradicting plausible stories about love's value. So, and actually, most of the time, they want their descriptive account of love to explain why we value love so highly. Um, so they're asking like, we pursue love, we make sacrifices for love. Is it worth it? And one way to explain how it is because we say, well, the things that we love are also the things that have rational value or moral value for us. Um, and that's, yeah, anyone who denies that is going to have to explain, and they happily have done, but they're going to have to explain love's value in terms of something else. They might say love is inherently valuable. So even when it's irrational, and even when it's immoral, it's still going to be valuable qua love.
mm.
One way of going about it. But you run into, I think, some difficulties there.
Well, yeah, so let me state it succinctly and pointedly. Can you love somebody in the full original sense that abuses you?
Yeah, I mean, the difficulty is from the philosopher's armchair, I don't want to say no, because there are people who have these experiences where they take themselves to love someone who they also understand is abusing them. Well, I suppose that's the question, isn't it? Do you, if you're being abused and you take yourself to love someone, do you understand, that that's what's happening? And I probably would say, possibly not. Um, but there are quite serious concerns about, saying to someone, that thing you're telling me you feel, you don't feel that. I know better. Um, I take those kinds of worries really seriously. I think, the kind of epistemic injustice literature about, we should take people at their word when they say they're having this experience. So I do worry about that. At the same time, I do think it's possible to, in good faith, offer, I suppose, a defeater for somebody, and if we think about it in terms of like someone we know and care about, who we think is in a bad relationship, relationship with someone who's abusing them, and we say, look, like, are you sure you love this person? Because look, like your love wouldn't be justified, and maybe only the philosopher would put it in these terms, but we can imagine the sort of ordinary language version of how this conversation might play out. He's violent, he's threatening, whatever it might be. These things aren't the kinds of things that are love worthy. These aren't, that might be one way of kind of approaching that conversation, and that would be tantamount to saying, if your feelings aren't justified, they're not real love. And there's clearly a use for that in that context. That's maybe it's a bit more powerful to say, are you sure it's love, than it is to say, I know you're in love, but have you considered your feelings might not be justified? It's not quite as powerful, it's not quite as clear. And also, so long as we think that love is something worth pursuing, worth making sacrifices for, if we're just telling someone, yeah, you're in love, but your feelings aren't justified, they might say, well, my love, is worth pursuing regardless. So there's a kind of difference there, and yeah.
So it seems like the tension is, on the one hand, it seems very plausible that love is intrinsically valuable. If anything is intrinsically morally valuable, it's going to be love. And yet, on the other hand, there seem to be clear enough cases of people who claim to love somebody, and yet that whole situation does not seem to be like a valuable state of affairs. It actually seems to be very bad and something the person should seek to extricate themselves out of. And so we wouldn't want to say that what they are expressing towards an abuser, for example, is morally valuable. It's not. And so the difficulty is in reconciling the two. And I guess if push came to shove, my instinct would be to say that what they are experiencing in that situation might even be, like, from the inside, qualitatively indistinguishable from like real love. But like what we mean by love when we're talking about this concept of something that has moral value no matter what is an emotional response plus something else. That like that emotion is like a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. It's not enough to have the morally valuable kind of love that we admire and we seek after, and we think that would make the world a better place. It's not just an emotion, right? It's also got to meet certain other conditions. It's just hard to spell that out.
That's interesting. I mean, I would maybe press you on the question about, the kind of the phenomenology of love, and whether, like, I think I'm tempted towards the conclusion that in fact a love that like makes sense from a first personal perspective, that's a love that seems justified to the lover, is going to feel better than a love that seems unjustified, or at least where there's some sort of like tension in your mind. If you look at your beloved, to use the kind of language of literature, and you just think like, yes, this person, there's no doubt in my, I mean, maybe there's probably never no doubt because we're all human, but at least there's no sort of significant doubts, there's no rational concerns about this person potentially posing a threat to my safety, or about whether they even care about me or respect me, for example, then I think your experience of loving them is going to be really quite qualitatively different to the experience where you do have those kinds of concerns. And that's one of the reasons why I've been tempted to think that, love proper is always justified.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that what you're experiencing in those exceptional circumstances is love adjacent, to put it mildly. That is the explicit thing we're saying. However much it goes against this idea that you do take people at your word, you have to acknowledge that any answer we give to this will betray one of the two intuitions driving it, and so you can't avoid that. But that ultimately what they're claiming, I mean, I even remember, to give a less emotionally charged example, like being a kid and claiming to be in love with somebody. And I remember telling my mom, like, I'm in love with them, Mom, I am. And she said, no, you're not. Yeah. You're not. I was feeling something. But there it's more clear, like,
maybe
I was...
something very powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, very powerful too. But there wasn't enough understanding of the other person and shared experience for it to count. So that leads to my next question. But I need
Yeah.
to use the
Yeah.
restroom, so I'm going to be right back.
Okay.
Right, okay. All right, back into it. Let's get here set up. Okay. Well, that raises an important question.
Yeah. Hmm.
Is it really possible to love somebody that you just met, much less
Yeah.
at first sight? Is that a real thing?
Yeah. I mean, I would love to think yes, because that's kind of magical, but
Isn't it?
it's it's a lovely thought. But I think my philosophy brain says no. I think like I'm very much like sympathetic to what you were saying about it seems like what it is to love someone is to kind of go to get to know them and in fact there are philosophers, Daniela Dover for example, who argues that like um curiosity has this really central role in like constituting love as well as just being like a sign of love. Curiosity about the beloved. And then kind of knowledge of the beloved is like this kind of manifestation of your love. And if you've just seen someone, I mean, maybe we think that you can, we gather a lot of information about someone when we just meet them. Our brains are doing lots in our subconscious, but I think probably we're not going to be able to gain a deep enough knowledge of that person to really love them in any meaningful sense. And actually, there are people in the literature who dispute that and who think love at first sight is possible. I think Vellman, who I've mentioned before, is one of them. Satia, who has a very similar view to Vellman, definitely believes in love at first sight. But the only sort of treatment of love at first sight, for its own sake, is by this guy Moore, and he concludes, yeah, love at first sight is a distinct phenomenon from bona fide love.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think one way you might reconcile intuitions here is to say that love comes in degrees. And so maybe you can get a
Yeah.
measure of like actual love by perceiving someone and seeing something about them that is appropriately related to a love response. And that gives you like the initial spark of love, which then develops over time as you kind of get to know them more and cultivate shared experiences and mutual history. Maybe?
For sure, for sure. And I think like it would be weird to suggest that love wasn't a matter of degree, like that would be
Right.
strange. Like, so what? You're like going along with someone, you like them a lot, but then one day you're just like in love and that. I mean, some people maybe think that's true, but I think it's probably unlikely to be sort of cliff edge or like a
Yes.
crossing of a hard boundary and then, yes, we're in love now. Um, but at the same time, I suppose that sort of question about love's value comes back, right? So we want whatever our account of love is to at least be consistent with an account of why we value it or of its value. So if we think that like it's love proper from that very first moment, we kind of have to tell some story about how that's as valuable or at least like of the same kind of value as like the love that we feel, a couple years into a relationship or whatever it might be.
Right.
And I think that's going to be really hard. I think the kind of value that those experiences offer are just very different. Not to say that there's not something super powerful about seeing someone across the room and being like, whoa, I really fancy you.
Right.
um, so, we all want that maybe. Some of us want that. Yeah.
Does I take it as obvious, and maybe it's not among philosophers of love, that loving somebody generates moral obligations to them that you do not share with people whom you haven't cultivated that love with. So, for example, I think it is perfectly appropriate if you can only save two people, one of which is your spouse. It is okay every single time to choose your spouse and not to consider hardly anything else about the other person. Now, of course, philosophers can come up with counterexamples about like, well, but this person's going to save the world from utter destruction. So, but barring those, it's almost like it would be grotesque for you to choose the other person over your spouse.
Yeah.
And I would say, well, that's because you have a real objective thing that's here now. Love. You love them. And that has now created moral obligations. It's kind of similar to the idea that we have specific moral obligations to our family that we don't share towards those outside of our unit. It's a little different though, because this is something you explicitly choose. It's not something you're born into. So maybe that gives it more legitimacy, I guess. But what do you think about that? And what do philosophers of love in general think about that? Connecting these
Yeah,
things to morality.
yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one again. Another interesting question. It's almost like you've done this before. Yeah, I would say my first reaction to these kinds of thought experiments, where you've got like the drowning wife, the drowning spouse, a bunch of other people, the good spouse who loves properly just saves their partner without thinking. And I always think it's a bit of a false dichotomy, right? Like we've got on the one hand, you like have a bit of a think before you save your wife, and on the other hand, you don't think at all, you just save your wife. Like Susan Wolf has this really great paper about these kinds of thought experiments where she says, like, what about thinking about it after? It
Mm.
kind of seems like the ideal moral agent and spouse, we can converge here, is someone who kind of saves their partner without thinking about whether it's the right thing. But then maybe after, maybe they're like, hang on, there were a lot of, they ponder on the tragedy of the event and they wonder if they did the right thing, morally speaking. They maybe know that for them there was no other option and they remain committed to that, but they still, I might think that I'd be kind of creeped out if my partner saved me and then never thought twice about the day, about what went down. So
Yes.
I suppose there's kind of to then bring it out of the thought experiment and into real life. It might be like, yeah, we want our family members and our partners to do what's right for us, and to look out for us primarily. But we want them to occasionally ask, like, whether that's the right thing for them, and whether like the primacy that they give us and the priority they give us is right. We want it to be part. We don't want them to like. I suppose this comes back to the unconditionality of love as well a little bit. It's like the extremity of the ideal is maybe a bit actually implausible when we look at it up close. Like we don't want someone who just doesn't just puts us first all the time and never challenges us or never
Mm.
thinks about where it might be better for them to think about a distant family member as opposed to us or someone that a colleague or something. What do you think about that? I don't know if my intuitions are funky there.
I think you're right that it's a good thing, it's a healthy thing to engage in critical reflection upon the obligations you have to the object, the beloved, your beloved, and your obligations to humanity as a whole, and how those might come into conflict. But if we're going to say that it's a good thing to unthinkingly save the drowning spouse, but then it's also good to reflect after the fact on whether or not that was the right thing to do. I think both of those things are correct. But if that's right, you can't reach the conclusion post saving your spouse that actually what you should have done was save the other person or the other people. Because that just contradicts our original assessment that the right thing to do is to. It's almost like you don't want to be in a situation where what you're saying is it's a good thing to unthinkingly save your spouse, but it's a bad thing if you're reflecting upon it and really contemplating it to then go save your spouse. It's like, well, that's not how moral obligations work. We want, like, if it's right in the one case, it's got to be right in the second case. Like thinking further about it can't somehow make it no longer morally good. Do you see what I mean? I don't think that's what you're saying, but
Of course. No, no. I mean, I'm a little bit hazy on the details of the Wolf paper, but I
yeah.
think she's not only trying to point out that there's this kind of false dichotomy going on, she's also kind of arguing that like, maybe the only kind there aren't only moral considerate like the point of these kinds of thought experiments is to show that there aren't only moral considerations going on. There are other kinds of value, and that our care for somebody might be a kind of value that's relevant in one space or at one time and not another.
Mm.
But to go back to because I'm kind of aware that I've now slightly sidestepped your question, which was really about, what kinds of obligations do we have to the people we love. I suppose I'm not going to be able to give you like a complete answer because I'm still very much figuring that out
Mm.
myself. And I think it's very, it's very much like not decided in the literature either.
Right.
There's not, I wouldn't say that there's consensus about that either. It's still quite a new, the contemporary analytic literature is certainly quite new on love. But I think certainly what's true is that we do expect certain kinds of behavior from people who are in love or who love. And, those are expectations like to forgive, to commit in particular ways, to trust and things, to pay attention. And those kinds of expectations, and I'm trying not to use the language of obligations, but those kinds of
Sure.
expectations, I think, should affect how we think about love. And actually, to go back to those cases we were talking about before, of like love for an abuser, if we have these kinds of expectations of someone who's in love, then that's one reason to think that like there's something dodgy going on when someone's in love with someone who's abusing them, both because, the person who's abusing them is probably not meeting those expectations, or not all of the expectations we would have. And also because it seems inappropriate to expect those things of someone who's being abused, right? Like, we wouldn't expect someone who's being abused to repeatedly forgive their abuser or to continue to trust them, for example. So that would be my kind of answer. I hope that gets at the core of some of what you're asking.
So we've danced around it, but we've got to ask the central question: is what is love exactly? Is it an action, something we do? Is it a feeling, an emotional state? Is it an abstract moral value, as philosophers often claim? So I suppose you can outline the standard views, but also like what in your view is love ultimately?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a real mix of views in the literature that I think I had an interesting discussion recently with someone who kind of has argued for one of the positions. I'll say what those are in a second, but and he was kind of like, why? I mean, why isn't it just a mix of them all? And I found that really persuasive. Like, one of the views is, okay, love's going to be a kind of union. So you've got someone like Nozick is going to say, in love we form this romantic we, and it's kind of like it's a new entity with particular properties, and that where people have cast the view out in different ways. So what happens to you and your desires and your will when you're part of this we with someone? Do you, some worries about it are like, what do you lose your sense of self? Do you still have your sense of self plus this sense of yourself as part of a we? So that's one view. And then another view that's probably like the next most common is that it's a particular kind of concern for another person, usually one that involves like taking their interests as your own, so kind of disinterested in that sense, a kind of selfless concern for another person. But it's like those two are obviously very closely related.
Yes.
And they're going to have, advantages and disadvantages. They're going to seem to get some things right and some things wrong. And I think like a really legitimate response to these kinds of accounts is just to say, like, is it not going to be a kind of, there's a bit of forming a union, but there's a bit of taking someone else's concern as interest as your own. And there's a bit of, it's going to be one of those things at one time and another thing at another time. Maybe it resists the kind of analytic philosopher's dream of the necessary and sufficient conditions, maybe.
Yeah. So the one view that we've touched on, but you didn't explicitly mention here, is this idea, I guess, that love is about valuing another person, and then like the question is, do we create value by loving somebody? Create value in the beloved, or are we responding to the value that's already there? Now, to me, I was like, that's obscure, this idea that we create value in somebody by loving them, because then you go like, well, what was the basis of your love in the first place? If not the value, was it just kind of arbitrary? Anyway, what about that one? What about that?
Yeah. I mean, so I like the view. I think I've let this show whether or not I meant to. I like the view that love is a response to value, perceived value in the other person. I like that view. I think it protects us against lots of unsavory conclusions about when, and allows us to say that love is more or less appropriate some of the time than others. It also allows for this really nice idea. Well, I find it really nice that it's legitimate to want to like make yourself more lovable to your partner or to somebody. Not obviously, there are sort of extreme versions of that become pathological, where you feel like you're sort of constantly trying to keep up with their demands, or you feel like you're not enough or something. But I think it's like very legitimate. I mean, especially if you're someone who actually does have like some serious issues, like you notice yourself being very unkind sometimes or something like that, and you think to yourself, I want to be kinder because I will be more lovable and for my partner, or I want to be be valued by my partner in that way, so I want to strive to be better. I think that's really nice, and the kinds of views that say love's a response to value are going to make sense of those sorts of feelings that we might have. But I also think that being loved is a transformative experience.
Mm.
And being in love is a transformative experience. And that's why I kind of say I also like these kind of union views where it's like you do create something new with somebody, a partnership, and you probably grow together. And the way that love, in the good case, is going to build your self esteem and maybe introduce you to new things is going to create value in that sense. Um, yeah. Do you feel? Can I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
Well, I don't know. Do you feel like love has created value in you in the
Mm.
past? Does that ring true?
Yes. And I would wonder though in what specific way, and I don't know if it's
Mm.
compatible with the way that philosophers mean it in this context.
Okay.
But if I were to think about, the specific relationships and situations, and maybe not even just romantic, but broader kinds of love as well, it's made me a better person for sure.
Mm.
And in that respect, it's made me, I suppose we wouldn't want to cash it out in the language of like, it's made me more valuable, but it's made me more
Mm.
capable of contributing value to the world because it has made me a
Right.
better person.
Mm.
It brings you out of yourself in the right kind of love, in the right kind of
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
Um, Makes you want to be a better person for the person that loves you and the person that you love. And in that
Yeah.
respect, it does create value. It's
Mm.
just I want to avoid this extreme view that says there was nothing there to begin with in terms of like the basis of the love response and investing love in someone.
Right. Right.
There was nothing, and then there was value. It's you've got to begin with it. I think because I'm inclined like you to view love as a rational response to perceived value, at least
Mm.
in part. And I'll also say I'm quite charmed that you thought the like combinatorial answer of that it gets kind of all these things was the best because I have here point 5b on my notes. Can't love be a multifaceted entity that involves elements from all these views? And so I'm a genius. This has to be right
Yeah.
because you said it and I said it too. Um, I think without really having critically thought about it for very long, what's wrong with the combinatorial approach? I don't see any obvious reason that love can't be this like multifaceted jewel that has
Yeah.
elements of each. It's all of the things.
Yeah. I think the only time, and this is where like I do sort of lean back into the philosopher's chair, I guess, is the only problem with that is it has to be like sort of, coherent account still.
Yes.
I think probably I want to lean into this combinatorial approach, as you've called it, only insofar as we're not like getting ourselves into contradiction. And I,
Agreed.
I think nicely, like actually that a lot of these views are compatible, it seems. What's
Right.
not compatible would be like, saying love is a response to value and love is not a response to value.
That's right.
That's as far as I'm concerned, that's like one of the more interesting kind of debates that's going on, and one of the more heated debates as well. But yeah, certainly when we're talking about love's nature, it seems like there are probably a few things going on.
Are the people who say that love is not a response to value, are they the same people that say that love can never be justified or unjustified, that that's just a category mistake? Are those like the same views? Or
Anyway,
could you
yeah,
say love is not a response to value, but it's a response to some other kind of reason or rational ground?
I suppose you could. I'm trying to rack my brain and think about who would be a good example of someone to talk about. I do feel it might be worth like, maybe giving a bit of a defense for that view as well, because there are a lot of very clever and prominent philosophers who have defended it. So it's I don't want to come on here and
Like it's just garbage,
rubbish
obviously.
view, terrible view. I don't know how they ever thought that was okay to publish. Yeah. So I mean, like one kind of really strong reason to like it is that people have been very invested in giving like a unified account of romantic love.
Mm.
Or not, sorry, not a unified account of romantic love, a unified account of love, where the different forms have something in common, something
Yes.
important in common, quite a lot in common, in fact. Um, and I think that's like that makes a lot of sense. That's kind of the philosopher's prerogative, but also it's we use one word to describe them all, which would suggest they have something in common.
Right.
Um, and so, like, Harry Frankfurt has this book, The Reasons of Love, which has been very, very influential. And he basically says, well, parental love is the sort of paradigm case of love, partly because it's so disinterested. Parents will love their children, not, for what their children can give them, but just because they are their children and they treat them as ends in themselves. And so on and so forth. And even if the child is, like, I think he says, ferociously wicked, the parent's love will continue and will not be
Mm.
um, dampened in any respect. Um, and he also writes about his own experience of like loving his children before he ever met them, and knowing he was going to love them, and even the love began. So if we treat that kind of love as like paradigmatic, and we want to give this unified account, then we're modeling all other kinds of love and evaluating them insofar as they match that case. And that's where a kind of view that says love isn't always a response to perceived value is going to look like it has the upper hand in those kinds of cases.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Right. That does spell trouble for the account, as all good
Yeah.
philosophical counterexamples do. I suppose
Yeah.
in a case of parental love is difficult because we do have pretty strong intuitions that the best kind, the good kind of parental love is unconditional. Gets back to that first question of truly unconditional love. Even somebody who's utterly wicked would still deserve of unconditional love or be an object of unconditional love. And perhaps like an absolutely wicked person, it's still right for that person's mother to love them. And if so,
Well, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just
no,
going
no.
to say there is a text, and I'm really frustrated with myself that I can't remember the name of the person who's written it. But she gives a really interesting exploration of motherly love, and she actually argues that it may be, or at least she explores. And again, it's a while since I looked at it, but she explores this idea that like maybe the expectation that a mother's love should be completely disinterested in this way is unreasonable. And one of the things I'm interested in doing in my work is looking at these like feminist critiques of love, which are kind of in a quite different space, but then applying them to these intuitions that philosophers have about love. And so I'm thinking, in the romantic case, I'm thinking like the idea that we should forgive someone, love them unconditionally even when they treat us really badly, could play into really harmful dynamics that are happening.
Yes.
And domestic abuse is disproportionately impacts women and girls. So coercive control in relationships. So there is like a very clear feminist analysis to be made there. And similarly, we might think that, and I think this is less clear, but there's certainly an argument to be made that our expectations of mothers and motherly love are perhaps different from the expectations that we have for fathers and fatherly love. So that might be a way of pushing back on the idea that even parental love should be unconditional. Um, Although the case is clearly not as strong as in the romantic.
Or that while it's unconditional, like practically speaking, it's still based upon value. That like it's still a value response. And I'm just thinking out loud here. That like
Yeah.
we still want to think that wicked people have, and we talked about this at the very beginning. That wicked people still have value in themselves that arises from the fact that they are persons, they are human beings. That's a strong intuition that many people have.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if parental love is rooted in that, and in the fact that the historical fact that is your child, well, then it's
Yeah.
still a response to value, but maybe in too thin a way to get
Yeah.
at what people mean by the account of love as being a response to value. Maybe.
I don't know. I mean, I suppose if it's just a response to like that's my child, then well, there's in practice going to be value involved there. Like there need not be. So it's kind of logically at least separable from value. One person who's maybe worth mentioning is Vida Yao. So she has this paper, Grace and Alienation. I don't know if you've come across that in your research, but
Yes.
she in your travels. But she argues there that like, and she's not talking about romantic love. Actually her example I think is of sibling love. It's a fictional example of Glory and Jack are characters from a novel, and Jack is this like irredeemable person, and he is like a bad guy. I'll spare you the details, but he's a bad guy, and Glory knows this about him, and she still loves him. And Yao is asking, not is that possible, but given that it's possible, what's going on and why is that valuable? And she thinks it's valuable because it's a kind of gracious love that he is able to accept because he knows that it's not based on an attempt to find value in him or a perceived value that he maybe worries he actually doesn't manifest. But it's just based on kind of her deciding to love him anyway. And she thinks that this has like a particular value in our lives. and I think that's like really compelling, you know, like the idea that there could be this like gracious love that we could extend to other people, or that could be extended to us even when we have no value to be found. And I suppose I bring that up as well because, you know, she could say that what's going on in this case is that Glory is like recognizing the fact that Jack is her brother is a reason to value him, and that's where the love comes from. But she doesn't. She says there is no value in Jack, and still there's this love.
I'm reminded of the case of Ted Bundy, who, if I recall, his mother stood resolutely by his side throughout the trial, even when it was obvious what a horrific monster he was. She just said, "But that's my son." And I think people have a conflicting response to that. Like, on the one hand, you go, but he's horrific beyond comprehension. If there's ever a circumstance in which to disown a child, it's right here. But then on the other hand, there's some sense that, not that there's anything beautiful or valuable about him, but that motherly devotion, there's something there that's right. And I incline towards the first one. Between the two, I have a stronger pull towards the first one. But there is an element, however objectionable and almost grotesque it might seem, that like there's something about this idea of a selfless, unconditional parental or motherly love, no matter what. But I just don't know. I don't know if that's real. I don't know if we should really affirm that.
Interesting. I think one thing to say is like often in these discussions we can start to, you know, it can look like, well, you know, there's love and then there's not love, but there are of course all other kinds of ways of valuing someone or caring for them if we don't think love is a kind of valuing. You know, for example, we could say that she might be right not to, and maybe, I mean, we're assuming in this case that meant she loved him, her son, that is, but we could say like it was just a care for him, you know, that, and that's my sort of response to someone like Yao, is to say, well, you know, neighborly love or a kind of care can be completely irrational and perhaps even amoral and extended, and it can be very valuable, but that's not like the proper role of love. Love is something different, and we want to that's one way of responding, I suppose, to cases like that. Do you think something would be lost if Ted Bundy's mother was to say, yeah, that's my son and I care about him and that's why I stand by him, but I don't, you know, I'm not standing by him out of love because I can't love him now that I see, you know, do you think something's lost there?
I don't know if something's lost, but it seems to me that wouldn't quite absolve the moral objections people would have to his mother. It's the standing by him. You should not be standing by him, is I think where the issue comes from. It's like you need to make it clear through your actions that what he did is unacceptable, and there's a sense in which you're, even if only implicitly in the thinnest kind of way, you're allowing for what he did by standing beside him.
You're endorsing it somehow.
Exactly, in however subtle a way. And I think that there's something to that. And so I don't know what I would do if I had a child and they ended up being Ted Bundy. So in a certain respect, I won't judge. And yet, as a philosopher thinking abstractly, I'm inclined to think that, you know, regardless of whether it's love or it's care, it's the act of standing beside and refusing to denounce that I'm not sure is right.
In that case, then the case doesn't so much tell us about love, right? Because you could, it seems like it could be an act of love to refuse to stand by someone, because it could be a way of kind of expressing respect for them, and, you know, the belief that in you doing that they might think, oh, if my own mother doesn't, you know, so perhaps that case is maybe it's a very interesting case, but I don't know if it will tell us about love as such. I don't know.
So I have so many questions from viewers. In anticipation of this discussion, I asked my followers, my fans, I asked them if they had any questions for you, the up-and-coming philosopher of love that you are, and boy, did they respond. So let's just see how many of these we can get through. You might not have a well-developed answer to some of them. That's fine. It's very low-key. We'll begin with, in your mind, what are the ethics of non-monogamous romantic love? Ethical non-monogamy, intentionally loving romantically multiple people at one time? Is it possible? Is it advisable? Yes.
I mean, it's certainly logically possible. You know, I don't think there's anything in the nature of love that says it can't be directed at more than one person. It also seems like, at least for some people, it's going to be psychologically possible because plenty of people, you know, and we were speaking about the importance of taking people at their word earlier. Like people do it, and
Mm.
they say they love it and they enjoy it, and you know, there's lots of people report actually polyamory being like an extremely enriching part and experience, and that it can loving seeing somebody, I think it's comparison it's called, I'm gonna butcher this now, but it's like the experiencing joy at the love at seeing someone you love fall in love with someone else. These are experiences I personally have never had, but you know, I take seriously people who say they have. And something I think is interesting is that, and I know we've spoken about this before, but in the love literature, there's this kind of tendency to not only kind of argue that polyamory, or in fact, to not to argue that polyamory isn't a, you know, real love or isn't possible, but just to kind of assume that it's not.
Mm.
You know, and that the way love functions is that it's going to be, you know, focused on one person. It's going to be have this constancy. It's going to last a really long time. Um, so I definitely think it's a really interesting phenomenon, and I think like yeah, it's like I say, outside of my experience, but I don't see why not. Yeah.
Does love require like a robust or libertarian conception of free will? If you're familiar with that from the debates in metaphysics, like to really love someone, do you have to have this like strong capacity to do A or not A? And in the case of love, you chose to love them, and it was really possible for you to choose otherwise.
I mean, I am not super interested in whether or not I personally have free will. I think what I'm in the sort of, you know, metaphysical sense, I guess I'm more interested in like if my choices feel authentic to me,
Mm.
which I think they may well do even if I couldn't have chosen otherwise. Um, so in that sense, I suppose to kind of bring it down from the metaphysics to the sort of social philosophy level, not that I'm trying to imply some sort of hierarchy there, but just in terms of fundamentality of nature, what we're talking
To,
about.
to bring it down from the irrelevancies of the armchair philosopher, let's get real here. I understand. I get it. I get it.
No, that's not what I'm trying to say at all. But yeah, I think I would say like there's really interesting questions, I guess, about like whether love is a kind of like involuntary bond that you form with someone, and then you're like kind of, you know, you're and I would say like I really like the view that you can, I mentioned earlier, that you can embrace or resist love
Yes.
indirectly. So, you know, like Dua Lipa told us as much, you know, in New Rules. She's like, don't pick up the phone, you know, like whatever it might be, like her rules. You know, when we're really serious about getting over someone
Yes.
and no longer loving them, we end the relationship, we distance ourselves, we cut contact. We take these steps to kind of help ourselves detach emotionally. And likewise, when we really like someone, when we think, oh, it'd be really nice to love that person, you know, we ask them out on a date, we buy them flowers, we do these nice things. Um, so yeah, I hope that's going to be. That's probably a very unsatisfying answer to the person who's asked it for me to say that I don't really mind. But I think as long as it feels authentic and it feels like something you want for yourself, and you're not like, gosh, I really wish I wasn't in love with this person.
Right.
Then I think that's what matters.
Yeah, it kind of gets to the heart of the debate among like the libertarians and the compatibilists in their differing conception of like what really matters for something to count as a free action. Is it this like somewhat mysterious power over alternative possibilities, or is it
Yeah.
doing what you want, right? Like having your actions be in accord with your desires, which seems to be more compatible with the world being such that I don't have a power to do otherwise. So I see
Yeah.
I see it. It's a tough one. This is a
I
tough one.
see it.
I
Yeah.
personally think it's like extremely existentially important that we have libertarian free will, although I'm less certain of that as time goes on. But I find it very difficult to make coherent sense of that kind of robust free will. So TBD from me.
Yeah.
So, what does it mean to love well in general? Is there a single concept that well, hold on. I may need to cut this out because we've already talked about this. Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Well, this is kind of a different question. What does it mean to love well in general? Is there a single concept that unifies all of the different phenomenon that we call love, the love of self, neighbor, children, spouse, nation, world? Is there a core that, like these theorists of love, we talked about three different approaches, are they specifically focused on romantic love? And they would say, yeah, well, we call these other things love, but maybe they are, but my analysis doesn't apply to them necessarily. Or do they think that love is one univocal concept across the board? There is this core essence between the love of myself and of friends and of family and of spouse and so on.
I mean, I would be tempted to say that it's a kind of like valuing, in line with what we've said, TBC on what the value exactly valuing consists in. I think I'm not going to be able to give a good answer to that. It's a really, really interesting question. But I mean, there's even like the question of, it might be problematic to suggest that the kind of love that we feel for people is the same kind of love that we can feel for like entities or
Mm.
objects. Even though we use the same word, and even though we might feel really passionately about an object or about an entity, especially if it's like a country or something, there might be something like perniciously objectifying about that potentially if we try and make those two similar. So that's, I guess, a concern I would have about trying to come up with like a univocal concept. And in general, I kind of like particularist approaches in philosophy. I'm not so concerned about like coming up with big principles or headlines, but that's really a personal thing. It would be really cool if someone could give me like a really nice account, really parsimonious account, and be like, in all these cases when you say love, like you're talking about this
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 one
one
thing.
thing. I'd love that, but pardon the pun. But yeah, but I certainly can't offer one. Not at this point in the DPhil. Maybe ask me in 3 years.
Okay, will do. Okay, so now I'm quoting. The first person isn't me, it's the quote. I've got a friend who
Okay.
says that analytic philosophy of love is a performative contradiction because you can't
Yeah.
give a dry, logical analysis of love. And this friend
Mm.
says we should do continental philosophy of love, for example, Kierkegaard, instead. What does
Mm.
Mhairi think of this? I've got my thoughts, but I'll refrain and allow you to speak first.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get this reaction. I think I would just say, I mean, first of all, like, why be so sharp about the distinction between analytic and continental? I
Hmm.
mean, we have plenty of really wonderful philosophers who do both. There are lots of people who ask whether there really is such a divide. That would be one way of answering. Another way is just to say, like, I think analytic philosophy is like a set of tools, and we need not employ them in this really dry and soulless way. I mean, quite a few people I've mentioned are really using analytic tools, but they're also looking at literature. They're drawing on art and representations of love in the media that are then they're kind of analyzing them, as it were, as rigorously and as carefully as they can. But they're not hopefully bleeding them dry of interest. What they're doing is just trying to clarify our thinking about those ideas. So that would be what I would say. And also like why not? I mean, like why not see if like give it a punt, see what analytic philosophy can tell us,
Hmm.
and if we don't like it, we can always reject it, and we can see what continental is telling us. But like I say, we maybe have reason to doubt that divide as sharp as sometimes people say.
Is philosophy of love one of those less common cases where it seems like an experiential component, a first hand acquaintance with the phenomenon being studied, is pretty essential to coming to an accurate knowledge of the thing? Like, it would be hard for me to think that somebody who has never experienced love could study it
Mhm.
and understand it completely in a third person kind of way. Maybe a lot of areas
Yeah,
of philosophy are like that, and I'm being silly, but it seems like there's something especially pressing about wanting to make sure that our philosophers thinking about these things have a really steeped personal first-hand acquaintance with the thing, lest they offer an analysis which is just completely out of touch with the reality that we know from just experiencing it.
yeah, that seems right. That seems really right. Um,
Good for me.
or at the very least, are like paying very close attention to testimony. I mean, the way that the one thing that makes it difficult, I think, and this is why I kind of keep bringing up the like both, we want both the descriptive account and the normative account, and they're probably going to be, they're going to have to be
Yes.
developed together, is that basically I think we have in popular thinking like super contradictory intuitions about love.
Yes.
And like that's what's interesting, is that in one case we might be like, yeah, that's definitely love, and then in this other case we might be like, that's definitely not love. But there will be all these cases where, you know, it's going to be really difficult to say, because according to one set of our beliefs about love, it's going to come out as love, and according to another set of our beliefs, it's not. And the job of the philosopher is to kind of like ask which of those beliefs it's maybe useful to apply in different moments. So that's why I'm kind of interested not just in the question of like what is love, but like what is it useful to think love is, or like what is it helpful to think love is. And I think like the answer is it's helpful to think that love is something that like is worthwhile and valuable, which is generally seems to be shared. So
That's an important point about like the distinction between descriptive versus normative accounts. It comes up all the time, and it's a helpful distinction. It's, I guess, between the more sociological or psychological question of like what people and societies mean by love, which is an interesting question, but that's more like anthropological. Whereas I guess in the philosophical case, you're more interested in the question. It's hard for me to phrase this in a normative way, but like what love as a moral value is. Like, what is love such that it's good to love? How would you draw
yeah,
the distinction?
yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I would generally think about like the normative as being the question of value, and the descriptive as being the question of like what is. So it would be like what is, and then why. And in love, that's going to be like we want our descriptive account to be one that sits right with our notion of love as something that's worth pursuing. If
I see.
if we wrote like this account of like what love was, but it turned out that on that account it was like something nobody would want, then that would strike us as like, well, that's not right, because it's a fact about love that it's something that, if not everyone, lots of people want and pursue and think is valuable. So they're kind of, I think, inseparable on the question of what love is.
Okay. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. I have a question here. I'm not sure that I know what it means, but are there realist or anti-realist conceptions of love? Go ahead. If you know what that means, run with it. If you don't, then I can offer an interpretation.
Okay, I'm interested to hear what your interpretation is first.
Well, that I mean, in the scientific case, you talk about scientific realism or anti-realism, and scientific realism is like our theories really do get at what's true. Anti-realism is no, they're just useful at making predictions, but they're not really true. So then you might say the realist or the anti-realist distinction here might mean views according to which like love is a real objective moral value out there in the world that we ought to aspire to realizing in our relationships and interactions, versus a more nihilistic view, which is it might deny that this normative descriptive distinction and say there is no normative component. There really just is what people in general mean by the word love. And there is no thing in and of itself to be desired. It doesn't exist. That's maybe how I would catch that out.
That's great. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad I asked you. Yeah. No, I like. Yeah, I mean, I think there's also the sort of mind. Yeah, the kind of mind independent. You might be talking when you
Yeah.
talk about realism, and you might be talking about like this mind independent. I think that sort of doesn't really make a huge amount of sense in the case of love, because like even people who have these really embodied accounts of love, they think that like what it is to love is very much about how the body feels and moves, and kind of maybe even produces thoughts for us or something like that. Even people like that are going to probably want to say, I mean, that's still body dependent, right? So it's
Yes.
like, I think it doesn't really make sense to talk about like the idea of love in the world outside of us.
Yes.
So yeah, I haven't seen any debate, but maybe there's an interesting paper to be written there. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, one specific thing they might mean is like a platonic account of love, where love is the
Right.
abstract object that exists non-spatially,
Yeah.
non-temporally out there. But that I think would be too narrow, because even if you're not a Platonist, you could still affirm that there are like objective standards of proper love and improper love, and
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, an interesting one.
it's a good one. Oh, okay. So this is the question that I sent to you before all of this. And I said, so they asked, is romantic love inherently temporal in duration? And so like one way to cash that out is to imagine that one day science advances to the point that we become functionally immortal. Not a hard immortality where we're incapable of dying, but a soft immortality where, probably over time, like we'll live if we avoid the major catastrophes. Is it possible to truly robustly love the same person indefinitely? Like on most of our lives, we live for about 80 years. And if we're lucky, you have like a 60 to 70 year marriage. But like, could you love somebody really fully for 1 billion years or 1 trillion years?
God, 1 billion years or 1 trillion years.
Yeah.
I mean, why not? Like, kind of similar to the. I think if we think that love is like, partly constituted by knowledge of the beloved and an appreciation of their qualities, and if we kind of make some assumptions about this world where we're like softly immortal, that, there's opportunities for people to grow and change in the ways that they would, over the course of a normal lifetime. And we kind of control a little bit, and we maybe assume that like you won't change so much that you'll be like a completely different person from one. I don't even know how you would control for that, because I guess if the change was gradual enough, it might be okay. I don't know.
Right.
If we just assume that like there's a certain amount of changing, but changing together that can happen even over this really, really long period of time, then I don't see why you couldn't love the same person. Yeah, in the way that, we, over the course of our lives, we change a lot, we grow a lot, and we still, it's like you said, it's possible to have a marriage that lasts 60 to 70 years, and friendships that last that long. So yeah, maybe there's something that happens at like year 1000 or something, where you have the 7-year itch, but at 1000, maybe we see that periodically, and it becomes a trope. The softly immortal Marilyn Monroe version, the 1000-year itch. But I don't know. Yeah. I kind of don't see why not.
Yeah, I don't see why not. I think maybe to even go on the offensive for this position that you can. It's like after 1 billion years, you've had 1 billion years of shared experiences with this one person that you don't have with other people. That has got to feature into and infuse itself into the foundation of the love you feel for them and the loving relationship. You're not going to let that go. You shouldn't let that go.
No.
It's this extremely valuable thing that's now cultivated that would take 1 billion years to get again. So that's what I think.
Are we assuming in this world, this is maybe like an annoying question, but are we assuming in this sort of like nearby, maybe not so possible world, that that like people are being born all the time at the same rate? Like I'm kind of assuming that you remain like you're healthy in your body. You kind of retain a kind of physical youthfulness, at least in your capacities.
Yes.
Or something, but because it looks like it might be really important. I mean, we already know that there's problems with intergenerational understanding, but what would the age gap? What would the ethics of age gap relationships be like in this?
Right.
In this world. Some people are like 3 billion years old, and other people are like 32,
Well, it's hard because that length of time gets you into a possible world that's very far from our own, because the human brain it is a finite thing. And so it's got to be finite in terms of the information that it can hold. And I recall the illustration from Doctor Who where the doctor made somebody immortal, and they had to keep a diary because after 800 years or so, like they would forget what happened. There was just no capacity. So we have to modify and say, well, no, but here we're uploaded to computers or something, and our cognition, it's there. It can be indefinite.
Because that's an interesting point. Like if you forget, say, like every 500 years, you have no recollection
of what
anymore
happened before.
Of what happened.
Yeah.
That's like, you wouldn't necessarily. Well, you would still have 500 years worth of reasons to stay with your current partner, I suppose. But interesting. Wow, there's a lot to unpack here.
There's a lot. That's philosophy. All right. Well, I'll end with a more personal question. What is the reason that you study philosophy of love? Because when I met you, I thought that this was such an intriguing field. I didn't even know that it was a specific thing. I thought maybe it would fall under some broader philosophical specialization. And I was fascinated to learn that, no, there is a explicitly defined conversation about what love is. Why are you choosing to specialize in that and study it? What motivates you?
Well, to be honest, I was kind of reading the philosophy of love literature, and I was like, I felt like people were saying all these things. They were saying, they were assuming love, and they were like, and obviously love is unconditional if it's true love, and love lasts for a really long time if it's true love, and if you really love someone, you would never replace them with anyone and these things. And I was like, I don't know about that. And partly, I think why I had that kind of skepticism about these things was because I had previously been really interested in like feminist theory and feminist perspectives on like both our like interpersonal relations, but also like the nuclear family and things like that. So I was kind of quite critical, and then when I sort of moved from the kind of most cited papers into the kind of newer literature, and I discovered like some people making the kinds of arguments that were popping up for me when I was reading, I was like, wow, this is a really interesting conversation. And yeah, and it was a kind of that's how I got into it. It was kind of, I sort of found myself disagreeing with these papers, and that's always a really fun place to start for me, because then I'm like, am I missing something, or am I having a thought that might be worth pursuing? Yeah.
Well, Mhairi, thank you for coming on the podcast today. It has been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely, if a little nerve-wracking. It's been really interesting conversation.